Chandragupta Maurya founded one of the stable and most powerful empire ever recorded in the Indian subcontinent. But his achievements are relatively unknown compared to Alexander the Great, who existed at the same time. There are many questions than answers we know about this great emperor of the ancient India, like, how did he form one of the greatest empire in India? Why did he revolt against the existing Nanda Empire? What was Alexander's role in all of this? Did Chandragupta and Seleucus Nicator fight? We will try to answer all these questions and much more in this video series. This video is not a history of the Mauryan Empire but the tale of the Mauryas. Indian history of that time is not well documented or it was lost to time. Whatever remains of it and few archaeological evidences has helped us to get a picture of what was happening in India at that time. However, it is still not enough to provide an entire historical narrative for the Mauryan Empire. So, we have to piece together the various legends, archaeological evidences and whatever remains from the Greek and Indian texts to form the most plausible events which occurred. This would be the tale of the Mauryan Empire. To understand Chandragupta's rise, first we would need to understand about the existing political situation in India, especially about Magadha, during those times. In 413 BC, Shishunaga was the minister of Nagadesakar of the Haryanka dynasty, which ruled over the kingdom of Magadha from the ancient city of Rajagrai. Nagadesakar was a cruel and unpopular king, which triggered nationwide civil unrest. Shishunaga then revolted and deposed Nagadesakar and crowned himself as the king of Magadha. During his rule, Pataliputra was made as the new capital of the Magadhan kingdom. He ended the conflict of over 100 years with the kingdom of Avanti by decisive victory and made it a part of Magadha. He also brought kingdoms of Koshala and Vatsar under his rule. The seeds of the mighty Magadhan empire have been sown by Shishunaga. He was then succeeded by his son Kalashoka, whose rule was a relatively peaceful one. Kalashoka had 10 sons and he divided the kingdom amongst them, instead of selecting one able son to the throne. This considerably weakened the kingdom in the later years, and a quick downfall followed. One of his sons, Nandivardhana, was given over Pataliputra, who ruled as the high king, while his brothers served as the lesser kings. His rule was followed by Mahanandan, who ascended the throne in 355 BC. Mahapadma Nanda, who was his illegitimate son, murdered him with a dagger to his throat. In the ensuing confusion, he gained control over the vast treasury of the empire and murdered his half-brothers, who were the legitimate heirs to the throne. Mahapadma Nanda officially took control over the Magadhan kingdom in 345 BC and founded the Nanda dynasty. However, Mahapadma was not done. He feared the men with royal bloodline will press a claim on his throne. Due to his precarious political patronage, he decided to end all Kshatriya rule both within his empire and his bordering kingdoms. After years of wars and battles, the Magadhan borders were expanded with the blood of many kings. Many royal families were hunted and murdered and their family lines ended completely to avoid any challenges to his rule. Mahapadma was called as the destroyer of Kshatriya. The kingdom of Magadhan turned into an empire with many vassal kingdoms. After his death, Dana Nanda ascended the throne in 329 BC. He was also hostile to the Kshatriya rulers. In less than 100 years, 3 dynasty changes and countless murders carried out by the Nanda Empire made the lesser kings and vassals disgruntled. However, the citizens of Magadha were prosperous under the rule of Nandas. Dana Nanda especially built a very powerful army and could raise over 200,000 infantry, 20,000 cavalry, 2,000 chariots and 3,000 war elephants. This was the time Alexander the Great was about to descend into India. Chanakya was a scholar in the city of Taxila. He feared Alexander's invasion would be a great success considering the disintegrated nature of the Indian kingdoms. He devised many strategies and came to a conclusion that Nanda Empire has the better chance to conquer and unite the northwestern Indian kingdoms before Alexander. Then the Nanda Empire could present a united opposition to Alexander and could dissuade him to cross the Indus. So, he went to Pataliputra with this proposal to the emperor. However, Dana Nanda mocked and insulted him. Feeling dejected and humiliated, he left the imperial city. It was during this time he met the young and ambitious Chandragupta. He was the only surviving son, the chief of the Maurya clan. He was charismatic, ambitious, and had a great mind for battle tactics. Soon, both Chandragupta and Chanakya found their interests aligned with each other and became allies. With their combined knowledge, they discovered and looted a small treasury from Dana Nanda and escaped to Taxila. Chanakya advised Chandragupta to undergo his formal education for warfare and administration in Taxila, the city which was the center of learning in ancient India. Chanakya was out recruiting men for their army with their newfound treasure. It was the year 327 BC and these two men had great plans for the future of India, but they were still trapped between the two mighty empires. Alexander and the Greeks were ready to cross Indus from the west and Dana Nanda was sitting comfortably in the rich Gangetic plains of the east. In 327 BC, Alexander finally decided to cross the Indus River with an army of around 50,000. The first Indian city he encountered was Taxila, a city built on trade, and it was considered as the education center for the Indians. Ambhi, the king of the Taxila, knew he could never stop Alexander with his inferior army. So, he decided to play it safe and save his city from the total destruction from the Macedonian army. He surrendered to Alexander and offered him troops and elephants. Alexander accepted his proposal and made him his satrap of Taxila. The first Indian kingdom joined the Macedonian Empire. It was here Chandragupta Maurya met with Alexander. Chandragupta's knowledge impressed Alexander and accepted him to serve under him. Chandragupta then learned all about the Macedonian armies and how they exploited the weakness in the Indian kingdoms. He hoped to gain Alexander's trust and use him to defeat the Nanda Empire. He knew that once Alexander withdraws from India after his conquest, Greek occupation would eventually fade away. Then he could use that opportunity to gain control and form an independent and united empire, free from Alexander and Dana Nanda. By this time, Alexander was determined to conquer India. Between Jhelum and Chenab lay the next Indian kingdom, ruled by Porus. From Taxila, in 326 BC, Alexander summoned Porus and other nearby local rulers to pledge their allegiance to him. Porus welcomed the meeting, but he said the meeting him at a battlefield would be the most appropriate venue. Monsoon has already begun, and usually no Indian kingdoms carry out war campaigns at that time. So, the Indian troops were ill-equipped to fight at those conditions. Also, Alexander thought the light-armored nature of the Indian army would be no match for his phalanxes. So, he decided to attack without wasting any time. On the other hand, Porus hoped the constant rain and flooding of the Jhelum river would halt Alexander. He could then fight his enemies after the monsoon, when his chariots would be more effective. Alexander crossed the river and used his superior tactics to outthink his opponent. As expected, the Indian chariots were useless in the wet mud and Greek phalanxes could defeat the light armor Indian infantry. But the Indian war elephants almost turned the tide of the battle, single-handedly. In the end, Alexander's forces were able to prevail over those magnificent animals. Porus had decided to die fighting. Alexander, who had watched Porus throughout the course of the battle, was impressed by his enemy's valor. So, he wished to capture Porus alive and ordered his men not to kill him. Porus was captured and brought before Alexander the Great, who asked him how should he be treated. Here, Porus infamously replied, "Treat me as a king would treat another king." Even more impressed now, Alexander indeed treated him like a king, allowing him to retain his lands and made him his satrap. Celebrations were carried out in Macedonian camp until the end of monsoon season. Even though they were victorious, many men were killed by the Indian elephants. This was the only time Alexander's army has come close to a defeat in this campaign. Before leaving, Alexander placed his friend Philip as the governor and asked him to keep a watch on Porus. Alexander then crossed Chenab, Ravi and reached Beas, all the way adding countless towns and cities under his rule. By this time, his army was on march for 8 years and demanded to return home. The rumors of a very large Nanda empire, which could field 5 times the size of Porus' army, has started to worry the men. However, Alexander argued that he got reports from local people that Nanda king was not popular and many smaller kingdoms would actually support his invasion against the Nanda empire. But it did little to change the mood of his men. The prospects of his adventure did not appeal much to his followers. As far as his Indian campaign is concerned, from the very beginning, the course of Alexander's invasion did not run smooth. It was threatened by rebellions both among Greek and Indians. Alexander realized he could not hope to conquer India with his reluctant army and agreed to return. But Chandragupta was unhappy and it would mess up his plans if Alexander returns. He pressed Alexander to move forward and conquer Nanda Empire. Their debate turned to a heated argument and Alexander sentenced him to death. However, Chandragupta escaped from Alexander's clutches and the two men would never meet again. To complete his explorations, Alexander opted to return by sailing down the Jhelum and Indus rivers. In late 326 BC, ships were readied and he sailed down the rivers while adding numerous small kingdoms to his ever-expanding empire. These kingdoms were more of individual city-states fighting among themselves, which Alexander exploited easily. Even though all these cities resisted against Alexander's invasion, they could not present a united opposition because of differences among themselves. Even as he was busy conquering along the Indus, his Indian states started to revolt against the foreign occupation. Chanakya has recruited a small army with their treasure and started to instigate revolts against the Greek rule in India. First, the Greek governor of west of Indus, Nicanor, was killed. Philip, who was originally asked to keep an eye on Porus, was given the governorship. Chanakya and Chandragupta made a pact with Porus to help him eliminate Philip, who in turn agreed to provide his army to fight against the Nanda Empire when the time comes. They hired mercenaries and Philip was assassinated in 325 BC. Philip was a close friend of Alexander and a powerful governor in the Indian regions of the Alexander's empire. His assassination started the downfall of the Macedonian occupation of the India. Alexander was furious of his friend's assassination. However, there was little he could do at that time. He could not afford to go back and control the rebellions. Finally, after a long campaign, Alexander reached Susa in 324 BC. Eventually, he would die in 323 BC, which would set off a series of wars within his vast empire. By this time, Chandragupta had freed and united most of the Indian states and formed a coalition with the local rulers to fight against the Nanda. Alexander's attempted Indian conquests did not create a major impact in the subcontinent and Greek occupation vanished by the time of his death. However, Chandragupta had used the power vacuum in the northwestern regions of India to create the coalition of kingdoms with him as their leader. With his newfound alliances, Chandragupta is finally ready to confront Dana Nanda.